So now let's get today's event started. Avoiding the dark side of gamification in employee training with Carl Kopp. Carl, welcome back to Training Magazine Network.
Thanks. Great to be here. Hope everyone is doing well. I am excited to talk today about the dark side of gamification and what we can do to avoid the dark side of gamification.
And Carl, sorry to interrupt. You might have accidentally hit a pause. Oh,
Yeah,
we
I see
just,
my camera is not. Let me see if I can turn it back on here.
you should be able to, hopefully.
Cannot use camera. It's telling me
Well,
another application is using it, but that is not true.
that is
Uh,
very, very odd because, we do
yeah,
careful testing of all of this before the session. Oh, there
I
we
know.
go. I
Okay,
think
there
it's
I am. Yeah.
okay.
I really
Thanks,
I
Carl.
really do exist, yeah.
Yeah, you
Okay.
do. That's fantastic.
All right. Very excited to be here to talk about the dark side of gamification. Thanks again to ELB as well. So I just couldn't resist this, avoiding the dark side of gamification. Come over, Luke, come over to dark side. It's really easy to do that with gamification. It's easy to take kind of the lazy route or the not critical thinking route of gamification. And that's why gamification sometimes has a negative reputation. And just like lectures can be boring and counterproductive, just like uh, uh, class discussions sometimes can be non-productive as well. Gamification, just as with any tool, can sometimes be not helpful. So the first thing I'd like to do is have a couple of poll questions for you. And the first one is, what gamification mistakes have you made? Maybe you haven't made any, you're perfect every time. Maybe you've overemphasized rewards or points, you made the game too complex, or you didn't account for different player preferences, or you focus too much on competition over collaboration, or even skipped user testing before implementation. All of those are issues that you can have. It looks like the majority of people making the game too complex, and that is so typical and happens so often. Luckily, there's some tools to help with that, but it's actually something that happens more than you would think. So that is the winner, I guess, of making tools too complex. So we have one more poll question, just trying to get a sense of what's going here. Are you planning on implementing gamification in your next project? So within 3 months, 1 to 3 months, no specific time frame. Okay, nobody's thinking. Oh, a couple people 7 to 12 months. I am doing a number of webinars with Training Magazine Group, training because I actually have a new book coming out in April of 2025. So my publisher says don't talk about it because it's too early, and then people will be like, "Oh, I already heard about that book," but I'm kind of excited about it. So we see that we've got um, no specific timeline wins, but most people are thinking a number of people 1 to 3 or within the next month. So let's try to avoid some mistakes. So one thing that I did want to point out is I've got lots of resources all over the place. So if you have LinkedIn Learning, and most colleges, universities, and corporations have LinkedIn Learning, I've got LinkedIn Learning classes on there. So they're free to you if you've got LinkedIn Learning. If you're in YouTube, I have a really fun series I'm doing there called the Unofficial Unauthorized History of Learning Games. Sometimes I call it the Authorized Unofficial. Anyway, but it looks at learning games. I talked to Tiagi last time, which is fascinating. Scott Zimmerman, who created a game called The Lost Dutchman. So all kinds of resources there as well I wanted to point out to you. And the link to that will be in one of the things that we hand out. Thanks. Hey, Trisha, how you doing? um, good to see your name there. Let's start with what is gamification. So gamification, and this isn't even my definition of gamification. I thought it was better, so I'm using it. But gamification, an instance when the system designer makes the motivational properties of games and applies them to learning activities while taking into account the human desire to communicate, share accomplishments through goal setting, to direct actions of learners, and to motivate them. So I only made a couple modifications to this. Being an instructor, I have to, if you don't read a sentence without a little carrot and correction, you're not doing something right. But I would say the motivational and instructional properties of games. So one of the mistakes, this is like bonus, I don't even have a slide for this. One of the mistakes that people make is they think gamification means turning something into a game. It does not. It means using the same mechanisms and elements from games in the design of instruction. And I'm going to talk about that as we go along, but I just want you to keep that in mind. Yes, we can take content and we can gamify that. I call that content gamification, but we can make small tweaks to information and ideas and make it really powerful and effective. So here's the agenda for today. We want to avoid pointification. We'll talk about that in a minute. We want to avoid me versus the world. We want to keep it simple and fun. We want to not, we want to kind of think about a variety of gaming experiences. We tend to teach and design instruction how we tend to learn. We tend to design games based on what we like to play. And so we really want to think about maybe we should design for how maybe other people want to play. And it better be good. So, whoops, I'm a little click happy here. So, pointification. So, some people think that gamification is only about points, badges, and leaderboards. I actually call that the evil trifecta of gamification. Now, the one thing I want to point out is it doesn't mean that points, badges, and leaderboards are bad. In fact, there can be very positive uses of points. For instance, points can tell you how close or how far you are from a learning goal. So if the learning goal, if you're most successful, you get 10 and you get 5, you're halfway there. If you get 1, you got a long way to go. Badges can be very effective if everyone values and adheres to the badge. So I'll always give this example. So black belts in karate are definitely a form of badging or leveling, depending on how you want to do it. We'll call it badging for today. Now, if you are 6 Sigma black belt and you walk into a dojo, that 6 Sigma black belt really has no power, right? Or if you're in the dojo, you have a black belt and you walk into a company and say, "Hey, I'm a black belt. I can help you with your 6 Sigma operation." It might not align. So your badging needs to align with the goals of the organization. And that alignment needs to be valuable. So, yes, in a dojo, we value a black belt, but not a black belt in Six Sigma, a black belt. In Six Sigma, we admire the Six Sigma black belt. So, we have to have the right context in order for the badging to be effective. So, pointification, people have labeled gamification shamification, exploitation, where pointification, because they believe it's nothing more than manipulation. In fact, the great Jesse Shell, who develops games out in Pittsburgh, called it chocolate covered broccoli. And so one of the things that you need to think about is how can you avoid chocolate covered broccoli? Well, I don't know that you can 100% avoid it, but what you have to do is make it meaningful. Chocolate covered broccoli, chocolate doesn't really cover the flavor of broccoli. So maybe let's not use chocolate, but what if we use like Parmesan cheese or salt or oil? That makes the broccoli taste a little better. I don't know if it's good enough for George Bush, but it makes it taste better. So let's not. So gamification would be. So a mistake that you would make is, oh, let's go all the way with chocolate because chocolate's good by itself. So let's do. No. We want little flavors to enhance it, and it's an undue emphasis on points. So let's go ahead and play a game. Yeah, bacon wins hands down. So let's go ahead and play a game. This is a game called Progress Wars. And Phil's going to put the link in there. You're probably going to go away for a little while and play the game. That's okay. I'll give you maybe 30 seconds or so. But this is a game called Progress Wars. And I wanted to say that if you think so if points were truly the motivator and the interesting thing, if we just click on perform mission, notice I'm moving up a level and I've gained some points, and I click some more and I perform the mission again, and I click again. Now I'm already at level 3, and you keep clicking it and clicking it, clicking it. Fish for protection money, right? This is just gamification, right? It's just pointification, right? It's points for no reason, no purpose, no goal. It's not giving me any feedback. It's not giving me any information. It's just a random assignment of points. And if the points don't mean anything, then the points don't mean anything. And so one of the things that we need to think about is, can the points give feedback to the learner? Are the points valuable in the social system that we've created? So now that we're going to head back to the slides and take a look at an example of pointification gone wrong. So how many of you have ever done a star chart for your kids? Right? For those of you who don't know, star chart is, hey, if you brush your teeth, you'll get a star, right? So when my wife and I first had our son, Nathan, this is years ago because Nathan is now 30 years old. He is married, and he and his wife are having a baby in April. So I'm going to be a grandfather, which is kind of exciting. I think I'm the world's youngest grandfather. I'm not sure, but I think so. But anyway, so when we first had kids, I said to Nate one day, I said, Nathan, I need you to go up and brush your teeth. Dad, I don't want to brush my teeth. I'm like, Nathan, I will give you a star if you brush your teeth. And that kid never moved so fast in his life. Like, oh my gosh, he like bounded upstairs, brushed his teeth, came back to get thank you, everybody, came back to get the star. And I'm like, I turned to my wife, I'm like, this raising kids is like so easy. Like, we'll just give them stars for everything. I don't see what the problem is. Like, why do people have an issue with this? So then maybe 2 days later, right? I said, Nate, go upstairs, brush your teeth, you'll get a star. He's like, Dad, I don't want a star. I'm like, well, what do you mean? I want 2 stars. And I'm like, oh my gosh, so 2 stars. And then after a while, he didn't even want 2 stars. We ended up giving him candy bars to brush his teeth, right? Not the goal that we wanted. Why did that happen? Because if we totally use intrinsic motivation, I'm sorry, extrinsic motivation. If we totally use extrinsic, which is motivation outside of ourselves, eventually the only way to get that external motivation to continue is to keep upping the external motivation. And there's a certain point where you can no longer keep raising that external motivation. Now, the good news is most people are motivated by both internal and external motivation. So if you can add them together. So for example, why are lots of exercise apps gamified? They're gamified because we know we should exercise. We all kind of know it. It's much easier to watch TV than it's to go exercise, right? So that little nudge or little nudge that says, hey, Carl, you need to go exercise. You're like, yeah, you're right. Okay, I'm going to go exercise. So think about that from a learning perspective, right? You need to know this information. You need to review this information. It should be information that's valuable to the person and gets that learning going. And then that little nudge should be like, yeah, I do need to learn this. Yeah, I do need to focus on that. So we want to think about it that way. So this, of course, is not the most engaging game in the world. In fact, watch TV one time and just try to play this game, and it becomes increasingly more frustrating. But don't want to say that using elements of games are all bad. So for example, LinkedIn Learning, way back in the early days of LinkedIn Learning, they needed everybody to fill out their profile, right? Because if you don't fill out your profile, LinkedIn Learning has very little value. So one of the things that LinkedIn Learning did was they put a progress bar on the profile, and you could see how far you were away from that experience. And just by putting the progress bar, nothing else, they increased online profile completion by 20%, which is pretty amazing if you think about it. So, yeah, just adding points doesn't work, but using an element of games like a progress bar, that works. So, thinking about elements of games beyond points, badges, and leaderboards, if we think about things like progress, virtual loops, story, character, feedback, adding those elements in can become much more effective. And Georgine asked a question: can you use progress bar in LMS? And I know we're going to save all the questions to the end, but you absolutely can. I don't know. A lot of LMSs are gamified. I don't know if a lot have progress bars in them. That's something that you would want to look at. But an effectivity point, it helps to know. People like to know their progress. People are very interested in how far am I from goal A, how far am I from goal B. And we actually, once we know progress, we actually create our own games. So, for example, does anybody here put in a destination in their GPS, sees the time, and says, challenge accepted? I'm going to beat that time. That GPS is not going to tell me it's 2 hours. Huh. Right? So even if it's not a game, it's not something that we're like, it's like progress. Like I can beat that progress. I can beat that goal. I can beat that number. So we as humans are really into that. Not across the board, but definitely a group of us are. And that becomes actually a motivational factor. Now, the other thing I want to talk about pointification is how to avoid it. So we avoid overemphasis on points, badgers, and leaderboards, right? You want to really think about, are there other ways to do it? We want to balance rewards with intrinsic motivation, like mastery, purpose. So, for example, we might want to remind people, like, the reason why we're doing this is because we want to become better customer service reps. The reason why we're doing this is because we want to serve our customers better. We want to make more sales, whatever we want to do. The other thing that we should think about when we do rewards is to keep the stakes low. You might say, well, what do you mean? Like, well, a lot of sales contests happen, for example, and they say how you'll win a trip to visit Phil in Hawaii, right? If you have the most sales. The problem with that is twofold. One is the whole mantra, culture, obsession becomes getting to Hawaii. So I'm going to make sales whatever way possible, sometimes ethically, sometimes not, right? Because I want to get there. And two, is it teaching me to be a better salesperson, or are the good salespeople going to win anyway, right? So by keeping the stakes low, there's not as much risk. So people will help each other, people will contribute to each other, and people will focus more on the learning goal and less on the ultimate goal. And that's what you want to have. And I can tell you from firsthand experience, even what seems like a low hanging goal motivates people. So, for example, I've seen gamified systems where if you answer a question every day, you can buy a cup of coffee. You eventually get a Starbucks gift card. And the amount of time people put into earning the Starbucks gift card versus them just going and buying a Starbucks, amazing. People are totally into the free awards. So Starbucks, it's not cheap, but it's not a high expense gift. Better yet, if you're going to do gamified kind of rewards, do a pizza party for your department or an hour early on Friday for the department. Do something for the greater good, not just for the individual. So the second thing I want you to think about avoiding in gamification is the me-verse world. And one of those ways that we do this me-verse world is we create individual leaderboards, and we have this competition. where everyone is out to win the competition. And to me, the leaderboard motivates the top person. Like, hey, look at me. I'm on top of the leaderboard. It's awesome. I'm large and in charge. Now, the 11th person or 10th person on the 11th or 10th person on the leaderboard goes, I'm kind of motivated to be there, but, not really. And then the 100th person's like, I'm totally not motivated. I'm checking out. So if you only use like one leaderboard and you allow someone or a group of people to get so far ahead, you're no longer motivating people to do anything. I'm like, hey, I'm never going to be able to do that. I quit. Right. And it's quiet quitting. So there's a couple of ways to handle this leaderboard fatigue. One is to create leaderboards for teams or groups of people. Like maybe I don't have a chance anymore, but I don't want to let down my team. So I'm going to do the effort, do the elements, help my team. Actually, there's three things. The second is it should be something that they should be doing anyway. Like, hey, if you know more about the product, you could sell more about the product. You'd have an easier day. So that's intrinsic. And third is mix up leaderboards. After a week, make a different leaderboard. After a week, reshuffle the teams onto different leaderboards. After a week, create a new criteria for the leaderboard. Constantly change what it takes to get to the top of the leaderboard. And if you're clever about it, you'll start thinking about, okay, well, some people, react really quickly, and we need that in some of our customer sales reps, for example. But we also need some people to think critically and to really think about the customer's problem. So let's have a leaderboard and a gamified experience that revolves around that experience, right? So make sure that you're matching your experiences to things that your company needs, goals that your company's trying to accomplish. If you simply go, oh, let's do it faster, and so we'll get more points, and let's answer the question faster, you might get speed, but you might need more than speed. So you really want to think about being intelligent about what you need from an organizational perspective as well. Yeah, Duolingo is probably a couple of people have mentioned it, and they just released Duolingo games, which are just amazing, where you go through and you speak like Spanish or whatever. Duolingo is probably one of the best examples of gamification ever. So you can go ahead and do that as well. Yeah, that's interesting, Catherine. I think the concept is interesting. I don't know once you uncover that if you're going to become quite as motivated. Were you like motivated when you found out it was fake, or were you? Yeah, Waze is fun. So, Church, I like the Waze where it will talk to you like you're a spy car. So the guy talks in like a British accent and pretends he's a spy. That's kind of fun. So how do you avoid us versus them? So one is it's not a bad idea to have a leaderboard that compares your score to your score last week. Think about in the retail industry, they look at store sales, right, from this year to last year. And I would like same person knowledge. Like, did Carl's knowledge go up? Did Carl learn more? Has Carl actually improved his knowledge base? So all of those things. So a me versus me leaderboard is a really good leaderboard to have. So think about when you look at creating this kind of environment, could there be a leaderboard that makes sense? This is where you provide comparison and improvement related to your own individual performance, not necessarily everybody else's, and creating groups can be helpful as well. Sarah, I do know of a vendor called Enterprise Game Stack, which has leaderboards, which you can look at. And if you want more information, you can contact me later. Keep it simple and fun. So here's one of the things that kind of frustrated me when I first started doing a lot with gamification is that people were creating like really complicated games. And in the poll, a lot of you uh, did that as well. And cognitively, it's not a good idea because if we spend all of our time teaching the learners how to play the game or the gamified experience, what happens is their cognitive energy goes to learning the game. It doesn't go to learning the content. And in a corporate situation, we want people to learn the content. So, one of the ways around that is to make the game really, really simple. Now, I don't know if any of you ever played the game You Don't Know Jack, which was originally developed by a company called Jellyvision. And it was originally released in 1995. So I want you to put like on your Wayback Machine. Some of you probably weren't even born in 1995. And it's weird. I know you're like, he's the youngest grandfather ever, but somehow he was alive in 1995. I know it's weird. But anyway, so in 1995, the internet was slow, laborious, and painful. And that was just to download an image. And so this game came along called You Don't Know Jack, which was actually an interactive trivia game. And so it was yeah, Cookie. It was supposedly a clash of high culture and pop culture with just a little bit of swearing mixed in there and raunchiness. It was a little raunchy. But my point is, it was not an overly designed game. It didn't have great graphics. It didn't have huge storyline. It didn't have a lot of stuff. It did have what Jellyvision called the icky interface, which was interactive conversational interface, which made it seem that the person was talking directly to you. But it was a simple game. And so when you look at creating a gamified learning experience, and it's just trivia, right? You got a question and four responses, and you picked one of the four responses, and you got points for the correct response. You lost points for incorrect response. So when you start to think about um, gamification, can you think about simple games, simple elements that can be put together to be done very easily? Another example way back in 1995 was this game called Acrophobia, which this was a multiplayer game. So basically, four letters came up, and you had to type in an acronym. You can make up anything that you wanted, and then everybody else would vote on the value of your acronym, right? Again, simple graphics, simple design, simple experience. So we need to try to mimic that. Another really interesting tool to think about that is card games, right? I probably don't have to explain to you what shuffle means, what draw a card means, what split the deck means, right? All of those uh, terms are pretty universal. So using card games to create instruction is really powerful, because using a card game means you can focus on the content, not on how do you play the card game. So that's another way to think about it. And one more, you can do it digitally as well. So you can do digital card games just like you can do physical card games. Now that the pandemic is semi ancient history, I'm seeing a lot of increase in the use of card games, getting people together using card games. In fact, the very first card game was in they believe 940 AD, and that was using um, cards with scenarios on them, not even numbers. So you can create scenarios, put them on there, and do that very easily. So it's a good way to think about creating games for learning. And now it's easier than ever. If you want like a professional looking deck, you go to Print and Play or the Game Crafter, or there's all kinds of places. Um, it's interesting. 3 years ago, the statistic was there were 5,000 new board games created. 5,000 new board games. That's like an amazing number of board games. Board games are simple. People know how to play them. People know what to do. It kind of brings people together. So these simple constructs are really effective. Now, another one I know Jennifer was mentioning here is the training arcade offered by ELB Brothers has simple designs already in there. Most of us have seen Jeopardy. So we know how Jeopardy works. Must be in the form of a question. Some of us have seen Wheel of Fortune. So we know how that works, right? So you can kind of go in that direction as well. You can also do a simple Scrabble trivia game that I talked about. Detective game's kind of cool because you have to put clues together to figure something out. So start thinking about games that are well known. And the nice thing anymore with that card game I showed you and with these games with but you don't have to program them. They're already done. They're simple. People can figure out how to do that. So it's kind of already done for you, which is kind of nice. Okay, so how to keep it simple and fun. Keep the game mechanics simple and easy to grasp. Play test the game. If somebody starts to get confused, you can be like, yeah, I don't know, this is the best game. People are getting confused. So keep that in mind and use familiar game structures. They're familiar and comfortable for a reason. Leverage that reason. So another issue is not having a variety of gamified experiences. Now, there's a guy named Richard Bartle who came up with a concept called Bartle player types, which he looked at people in multi-user dungeons and said there's 4 kinds of people in multi-user dungeons. There are people who are killers. They're the people that go after other people. They act against other people. They win through intimidation, bullying, that kind of stuff. With Bartle, there's also achievers. They want to get the most points, do the best. So their goal is to accomplish every goal in the game. He found there are people that were socializers and all they did was go into the game and talk to each other. In fact, World of Warcraft found this, which was fascinating. There were groups of players in World of Warcraft who never went on a quest. And World of Warcraft's like, what's wrong? Like, why aren't these people going on? This doesn't make any sense. Well, what happened was that the people were going in there to socialize. And in fact, there have been a number of weddings, people getting married because of the socialization. Yeah, the achievers, the killers always makes me think of Leroy Jennings. I mean, if we're going to get into World of Warcraft, Leroy Jennings. So those of you who don't know, yeah, there's a guy named Leroy Jennings. He's taken all this time his buddies are taking all this time to figure out mathematically how to defeat how to defeat one of the villains. And all of a sudden Leroy Jenkins just grabs his sword and goes Leroy and just runs in and gets everybody massacred after like 5 minutes of figuring it out. Which reminds me of another game story. Definitely ancient meme at this time. And I know you're wondering, like, wow, this guy knows a lot of ancient memes, but he's the youngest grandfather. I don't get it. I don't know. I don't know how that happens. But the interesting thing is that in those types of environments or social environments, you're going to have all these kind of people, but they're not fixed. So some people like to explore in one environment, but like to be an achiever in another environment. So my suggestion here is to make sure that you have a variety of experiences. If you, for example, just create one type of game, like a Candy Crush type of game, there's lots of people that don't like Candy Crush type of games. So don't create a Candy Crush type of game as the only game or the only kind of games that you take. Use a variety of games. People get really bored really quickly. So, and let me give you an example of this happening. And it just kind of blew my mind. So, several years ago, I was called in to consult. A company had a fish kill. Somebody dumped something down the drain. went into the river, killed a bunch of fish. This was way early with online learning. And they said, "Hey, Dr. Kopp, is online learning the right way to teach people not to dump things down the drain?" And I'm thinking, well, there's a lot of ways to teach them, but that might be one way. So I did an analysis, all that kind of stuff. And so they had a course on not dumping stuff down the drain. And the average amount of time a person was in that course was 7 minutes, start to finish. So think of 365 days a year. The average amount of time you're in there is 7 minutes, half the people less than 7 minutes. And almost every person I interviewed, I said to them, "Tell me about the course about not dumping stuff down the drain." And they're like, "Yeah, it's the same course every year." And I'm like, "What?" And they're like, "Yeah, it's the same information, same scenario, same content." And I'm like, "Huh, you're only in there for 7 minutes. You have 365 days that lots of stuff is going on. Yet every time you go in there, you're like, yeah, I remember it's the same." And guess what happens as humans if something is similar or familiar to us? Do we pay more attention or do we pay less attention? Oh, less attention, right? I mean, we've all been in a situation where we've driven home one day the way we do a million times, and we get home and go, "Oh, I can't even believe I didn't even realize I'm home. Like I'm not even thinking about it, right?" So the idea, yeah, I mean, I could watch the Blues Brothers movie, Kimberly, like over and over and over again. It doesn't matter if it's the same. But this was compliance training, so you can't imagine it was as interesting as dealing with the nuns, right? Or yeah, or, or the good old Blues Brothers boys. So the idea then is that we turn off things that are familiar. So if you're not updating your gamification, your e-learning courses, if you have the same compliance course with the same scenario every year, I can guarantee you people are checking out. So you really want to think about a variety of gamified experiences and a variety of appeal to the explorers, appeal to the achievers, appeal to the socializers, the killers, all that kind of stuff. So don't just design for a single gameplay experience. Keep in mind that not all learners are motivated the same way. So what motivates one person might not motivate another person. So you got to have a variety of motivational elements in there for gamification to be effective. And people do get bored if no different approaches are taken. You need different engagement strategies. That's why like one game is really, really popular and then it's not popular anymore. Like what happened to Pokemon Go? I mean, that was at one time the world's most popular game. What happens is people play it, they get a little bit bored with it, they want to move on. Well, that happens in learning games and gamification all the time. So having a variety of elements can be really helpful for that. Okay, so how do we design for that? Well, maybe include side missions, maybe include adventures, maybe let people play different games at different times. So maybe today you could play a Jeopardy game, tomorrow you could play a trivia game, next day you could play a detective game. So mix them up. They don't have to be long. The other thing is games don't have to be long. They can be mixed up. Provide more than one way to win. That's a good way to do that. Allow learners to pick things like characters or levels or do it backwards or that kind of stuff, and vary the aspects of the game, right? So that people don't get bored with repetitive compliance training. And somebody spelled board wrong. I don't know who that was. But yes, thanks, John, for pointing that out. So that's important to think about a variety of strategies and a variety of ways of approaching these games. Now, the next one is it better be good. And so what I mean by that is you spend a lot of time and money probably to create this gamified approach. And you've probably worked hard on it. Maybe you bought a tool from an outside vendor, maybe you created something in-house, maybe a combination, and you've worked to gain the learner's attention. You've worked to get the information in front of the learner. You've worked to make that happen and make that possible, and don't waste that. I wrote a book called Micro Learning Short and Sweet, co-authored it with a colleague of mine, Robin D. Felice. And the reason why people are like, well, why you're the gamification guy? Like, why'd you do something on microlearning? I said, because so many times we set up this great gamified system, and then when it came to actually presenting the content, it was horrible. It was verbs like understand. It was incomplete thought. It was just not effective instruction. So you really need to think about those types of elements so that you can have different impactful learning experiences and that the learning experience makes sense. In fact, I often say start with the learning outcome and then decide if you want to gamify it. Bad instructional design cannot be hidden or sugarcoated with gamification. Like, we can taste the broccoli. If it's poorly designed, if it's bad instruction, if it's not thought through, the learners know that right away. So don't try to fake it. And uh, not only do the learners get frustrated, they actually get mad. So if you've ever had the experience like, oh, one more training class, I can't believe this is so stupid. It's dumb. It's whatever. There's some truth to that. Find out why they're saying that, right? Is it because the instruction is not relevant to them? Is it because it's not well designed? Is it because you're trying to sugarcoat something that could not possibly be sugarcoated? Like, you got to figure all this out to make sure that that's true. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, games for their own sake aren't useful, right? Don't create a game just to create a game. Yes, and that's why Jennifer, I'm empowering all of you with some of these ideas and concepts that you can take to hopefully upper management, like explain to them what really needs to be done and what really needs to be what they really need to think about. And I always lead a lot of those discussions starting with learning outcomes. Like, what do you want your employees to do? What do you want them to be able to do? What does success look like? Okay, we can get them to success by this. Does that make sense? Right. And so, very, very true. Okay. The other thing to think about, matching affordances with learning outcomes. So, for example, if you're in a high pressure environment, a race to the finish, gamified dynamic makes sense, right? Like teaching quick call resolution. But quick isn't the answer to everything. Maybe it's alignment. Maybe you want somebody to have the ability to sequence elements in a process, right? Maybe you want them to be able to follow and tick off a procedure. So then you should be thinking about alignment. How do I get the learner to align elements? Because that's what they need to do in the job. Or territory acquisition, right? Stressing the need to acquire sales territory or market influence. And we're focused on getting how do you get territory, right? Maybe a sales rep conducting a total office call in a healthcare provider environment, influencing all the people in the office, not just the decision maker, right? So you can think about ways to create the element or what you're going to be doing in the game and linking it to the design of the gamification. So if you want people to do things carefully and you want people maybe that they have to pay extra attention and double check stuff, starting off with the race to the finish doesn't make any sense. Like, who can finish this faster? Well, we're really valuing accuracy and integrity of the data, not speed. Right now, eventually both will come, right? I mean, you can't take 2 days to do something. But if you're first starting off with the training or trying to emphasize what's valuable, you need to make sure you do that. Gamification are an abstraction of typically what we do, and we want to do the abstraction correctly. Okay, so that brings me to your thoughts. I can answer some questions that you might have, and also would like you to put your thoughts into the chat. This has been great thoughts, great impact, great elements. But I always like, when I go to a webinar, sometimes it goes right up to the end, and I'm like, I wanted to ask a question, or I wanted to find out about this. So I try to build in a few extra moments so that we can do that. So I'd like to open it up to some questions.
See people typing away.
For your External audience. So one of the keys. So there's a really interesting research study done, and it said, how come some gamification is successful and some gamification is not successful? And one of the things they found a lot of different things, but one of the things they found was that what made gamification successful were two main things. One was that the people that were going to be involved with gamification were consulted. Sometimes we call that a needs analysis. So if it's external, well, I would talk to some of the external audience members, not, like, what motivates you? What would get you involved with this? What kind of friction points are you having? What would be most effective for you? Like, I would definitely interview them. I'd have some ideas about maybe what we wanted to do, but I would try to do that. And then, uh, this might be, I don't know if this is in like a franchising situation where they don't have to take the training or whatever, but then I would find ways to make that enticing for them for the training. That can be always helpful and draw people in as well. Um, so hopefully that helps, Catherine. So do needs assessment, find out what they want. Oh, and the other thing which is interesting is people that, and this is not like rocket science, is people that play games tend to like gamified experiences better. You're like, yeah, that's like duh research, Dr. Cop. But one of the things that we did to act on that is we were in a large company. We were going to implement a gamified solution. And starting 2 months early, we started this Friday Fun Day. And we would send a non-corporate game. It didn't have a corporate subject. It was still safe for work. But we sent this game and said, hey, take a 15-minute mental break, play this game. And it got the culture of that company used to and comfortable with playing games, so that when we released it with actual real company content and things that they need to know, they liked it. They were like, yeah, that's pretty good. That's a great idea. So that can be helpful. Um, Yeah. So, Catherine, you've got a great specific audience. So, find out, like, does that audience play games? What kind of games? You can find out a little bit of the age group. At one point, the largest group of gamers were women over the age of 40. So, is that kind of the demographic? Kind of look at them. What kind of games do the, those folks play? They tend to play less epic games. So, and these are broad brushstrokes. So just take that with what you will. But uh, gentlemen tend to play games which are more epic, more adventure, more going off, and last like a long, long time. Um, Other folks tend to play games that are quick, like Candy Crush or Plants vs. Zombies. You can get in, play the game, get done, and go out. So those are so knowing a little bit of the demographics can help pick games too. So if you have like someone in my generation, okay, I admit it, I'm a Gen Xer. I grew up on like 16-bit games, like the good old um, Atari. So there's a little bit of nostalgia if I see a 16-bit character, right? I'm like, oh, okay. So thinking of those kind of things can help as well. Um, when you are designing a game, do you consider language features like reading, speaking, and does that influence you? Yes, absolutely. So in an ideal world, the game has as little text as possible. Uh, Unfortunately, none of us live in the ideal world. So we're always going to have some text, and we're going to have some interaction and some interfaces. So that definitely comes to mind. And here's another thing. Before I do a digital game, I take, I don't have any here, but I take index cards and I kind of draw out the game on index cards and I play it on the index cards. And the reason why I do that is because I can tell right away, like, oh my gosh, Carl, you developed like the world's most boring game. We need to change this. The language doesn't work, the interface doesn't work, and it's so much easier to change paper than it is to change computer stuff. And even if you have like a computer game, like ELB offers, as I said, lots of like wonderful little games, putting it on paper and finding out, do these questions work? Like, is that a good Jeopardy type question? You can make Jeopardy type questions quite, a lot of critical thinking. You could give a little scenario. You can make very in-depth questions, or you could just, whatever, and throw out some questions. And then the learner's like, well, these are like a waste of a question. Like this, I'm not really challenged by this. So thinking that through and writing it down can be really helpful as well. Let's see. So these are all great questions. Whoops, scrolling too fast. So James asks, would you use microlearning and gamification platform as an effective way to apply application of knowledge? So yeah, there's kind of an interesting way. Yeah, you can do that. So Phil, do you have this? Can we share my screen real quick?
Sure.
Show you something, James, here. This is a game we developed, a very quick game to teach people about cross-dock application. So cross-docking is when you bring in materials in a truck and you then put them in a warehouse and then you reconfigure the trucks. So this is a kind of a game / simulation that we created. And I want to show you very quick. So it's got a bunch of gamified elements. It's not designed to be played very long, although it takes forever to get to the warehouse. We had to change that because it's
Welcome
okay.
to our
So
distribution center. Which applicant are you?
you click
Nice to meet you,
player,
Anna.
and then we're gonna
Anna, let's go get you suited
skip.
up.
So basically,
All right,
this is
Anna.
a really quick
Let's-
game where you have a scanner, and your job is to scan the good items in terms of sorbet, sandwiches, and pops. So basically, I would come here, I have to order 2 pops, so I scan this, scan that, and then I have to do 4 sorbets. So if I do a sorbet that's damaged, it's not going to like it. Like here's a damaged one. Didn't like that. 4 sorbets and then 2 sandwiches. So basically, and the reason why I bring this up is because the question about application. This is an applied game. The people who do this job have something like this. They need to complete this on the job. But we don't want them pulling the wrong materials. We want them to understand the difference between damage and not damage. We want them to understand that they can only pick the right number that they want. There's a lot of things that we want to apply that knowledge. And by providing this quick little game and experience, okay, I didn't get them all right. Some pathetic picker. So, but by applying that knowledge and information, it helps you do that game. So that's an example of micro learning and gamification.
And Carl, we had
Yes,
a
we.
go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Yeah, Deborah, we did build that game, and it's a combination of Beyond and actually Authorware. No, Authorware. Articulate. Jeez, I'm showing my age here.
And Carl, we had a couple questions about accessibility. You can see here.
Yes, yeah, that's a big issue. I'm not going to lie and say games are easy to make accessible. Games are very difficult to make accessible. The way to do that is to use platforms that already have accessibility, like Rise has some accessibility already built in. It has basic games, text-based games. Like a lot of people think, oh, games have to have like clicking and links and all that kind of stuff. But if you think about early online games and think of how engaging those moods were, right? Multiplayer dungeons, creating text-based situations and giving people points for if you answer correctly is one way that you can help with accessibility.
Very
But it's
good.
not, unfortunately, there's no like engine off the shelf that I can mention like, oh, okay, this will make games accessible. So what we found is when that's a huge requirement or a requirement we use text-based games and text-based scenarios and simple points, and those tend to work well.
And Carl, where can people reach out to you for more information? And there are new pods there. Rate the session for today, please. And also, what are your most useful ideas or takeaways that you're going to use right away?
So one place people can find me, and I actually have a newsletter and post fairly frequently, is on LinkedIn. So I would say that's probably the best place to get in touch with me. Send me a DM if you know, want to talk one-on-one or whatever. But if you just want to keep up on like what's Dr. Kopp doing, or what is his thinking on games, I'm looking at some really interesting AI generated games and how we can use AI to quickly create a game, which is just, it's amazing what AI can do in terms of those games. So you can check me out there, but I also have a website, www.carlkopp.com, but I'm like the shoemaker's kid a little bit. So that definitely needs to be updated. But those are those are how to get in touch.
Great, Carl. What a
And I would
fascinating.
love, let me just, so all the time we get these surveys, right? And somebody says, not what I was looking for. DM, like, tell me what you were looking for. I'd be 100% curious. No judgment, just like, okay, well, where did I miss it? Because you get these feedbacks and you're like, I'd love to talk to that person. It made that comment, but I'm not able to. So if you're still here, if you're disappointed and it's not what you're hoping for, please say, hey, I was hoping you would do this, or I wanted you to show this, or whatever. And it helps me. I'm not going to guarantee that I do it next time, but it'll be helpful. Yeah. Thank you.
And Carl, thank you so much for a fascinating session here today for Training Magazine Network. And we once again want to thank ELB Learning for making today's event possible. And if you missed it earlier, the resources that we promised you, if staying through to the end, I'm going to go ahead and put that back in chat. And the ebook will also post with today's recording. So make sure you share this recording with all your friends and colleagues. They can join us here at Training Magazine Network. Membership is free in Training Magazine Network. We also have our Membership Plus program with special bonus resources, and some even from ELB Learning. So make sure you check out our membership drop down in Training Magazine Network. But once again, thank you to ELB Learning for making today's event possible, and learn how to unlock your employee performance on all levels with ELB Learning. Carl, thank you so much for,
Thanks,
again, a
Phil.
great session here today. There's still time to put in your takeaways with most useful ideas and takeaways. Please keep that coming. And also, don't forget, you can print out a certificate of participation
Oh, oops. I need...
and get ATD certification or recertification points. Carl, thank you. We again, we we know you're coming back for many sessions. Don't forget to check out all of the great sessions that are coming up with Carl into 2020, 2025, and register and check that calendar frequently, because we have so much great content. The calendar is just filling up with wonderful sessions that we know that you want to register for. Carl, thanks once again.
Thank you, Phil. Thanks for having me. Thanks, ELB, for hosting this, and appreciate Jennifer, all your help, and look forward to the next one. Bye, everybody.